Hello, everybody, and welcome. Friends of Cecil Sharphouse is very pleased that you're all here for our second webinar in a series. It's titled The Chasm, as you doubtless know. And we're very happy to have with us Rhianwen Davies, Victoria Yeomans, and Ali Messer. I'm going to let them introduce themselves once we get started, but before we do, I wanted to give you a couple of reminders. First of all, I should say I'm Louise Siddons, and I'm on the Friends of Cecil Sharphouse committee. We are happy today that the webinar is going to support the work of Nifty. If you are enjoying this, please do make a donation to the National Youth Folklore Troupe of England. You can find that information out in your invitation, or Bernie just put a link in the chat. We are recording, as Bernie mentioned, so please do be aware of that, and thank you for your patience with our transfer of this to the internet. It will be available for everyone to watch after the event is over. And lastly, we'll have question and answer period at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions as we go along, I can also break in and ask a question if it's relevant in the moment. But even whether you want it asked in the process or at the end, please do use the Q&A feature for your questions. The chat is basically going to be something that you can do with each other, whereas the Q&A will be directed to me, and I will pass those questions along to our panelists. So you should be able to see at the bottom of your Zoom window the Q&A feature separate from the chat. Do use that, and your questions will, I hope, get answered. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our moderator, Ali Messer.
So good evening, everybody. A number of people on this call may know me as a spectacularly inexpert dancer, but I love it. And I'm very happy to be here this evening with Rhianwen and Victoria. My main enthusiasm is playing traditional music for dancing, but that very often involves working really closely not only with the dancers and the organisers, many of whom are on the call, but with callers. So at that point, I would like my two kind of partners in the webinar to introduce themselves. Victoria, would you like to go first and Rhianwen second? So Victoria.
Good evening. So I'm Victoria Yeomans. I've been doing folk dancing since I was born, or technically before. Mum was dancing while I was in the womb, and clearly love it. I've been playing for dancing as well for nearly that long, and calling for about 15 years or so, something like that. And so I've had a fairly eclectic background in folk dancing, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
And this is one of the things, the theme of the evening is chasms, or the chasm. And yet this is something that the three of us have in common, isn't it? That we've had family involved in this for a while. Rhianwen, your turn.
So my name is Rhianwen Davies. I'm the daughter of Rhodri Davies. So yes, I didn't have a choice really when it came to dancing folk. Not that I wanted one. So kind of Ali has known me since I was sleeping on the stage as a kid when I just had enough of the dancing. I was a member of Nifty, which is the team that we're supporting today. I'm their longest serving member. I was in the team the longest out of all their history. So very proud to have that. I've been calling since being in Nifty. I left 3 or 4 years ago. And I've been doing kind of Ceilidh calling, contra calling and Playford calling since then.
That's lovely. And that kind of brings us to the start of what we're going to discuss, because both of you, amongst many other things, you are callers. And I think many of the people who are here at the event would like to hear from you about what you think a caller is. Is a caller a teacher? Is a caller an entertainer? What is a caller? And what I thought we'd do, so Victoria, again, if I come to you first and then to Rhianwen, and then we might switch it round when we start another part of the discussion. But I'm hoping that you're going to talk to each other and interrupt each other when you want to build or respond to a point that someone's making. So, Victoria, what is a caller? A teacher? An entertainer? Something else? Over to you.
Well, I think all of those things and other things as well. I think there are two main roles for a caller. Definitely entertaining and setting the mood of the event is a really key part. You're the one with the microphone, so you've got a big part to play in that. There's other people have a role in that, and definitely the band is one of those. and the organisers too. But the caller does front it, so has the opportunity to make or indeed break an event that way. I think the caller has a role in teaching the dances, and particularly at workshops, then that's about getting into how the dances work and how you can do them better, as well as the pure mechanics of who goes where and when and how not to collide. But I think then we get on to introducing the music, and the caller's role changes into prompting the moves, reminding people how that goes, and being able to facilitate the dancers and the music, creating a coherent whole and letting them take over it and take ownership of that. I always think I'm doing my job better if I drop out and I'm not needed by the dancers. There, if they need a quick prompt as the memory fades halfway through the dance, but really allowing them to dance with the music and to enjoy that experience of the dance, not listening to somebody.
That's really interesting. So, Rhianwen, is it the same for you? Do you think that you're a teacher, an entertainer, or something else?
I completely agree with everything you've just said so far. I'd also kind of build on like
Sorry, go on, Rhianwen. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd also say maybe like a facilitator as well, especially if you've kind of got organisers of, say, like a dance series or a festival. You need to kind of work with their expectations as well. And if something goes wrong while at the dance, you're also, again, you're the person with the microphone, so you've got to kind of think very quick if there is a tough situation happening.
Occasionally crowd control for that.
Very much crowd control for that, yeah.
So, Rhianwen, Victoria said something interesting there, and I wondered if this is something that you'd agree with in particular, that it's part of her job to help the dancers do the dancing better.
Yes, safe is always better.
Okay.
Yeah. In a workshop perspective, then yes, they're going to a workshop to learn something. If it's kind of a wedding ceilidh, I just want them to enjoy it. And if that means better, if they can enjoy it more, then yes, better. But I'm not going to start teaching a load of technique at a quite boozy wedding ceilidh. That is not my aim.
And Victoria, what do you mean by better?
Oh, yes, difficult question. I think it's different in different contexts. So at that boozy wedding, it's probably about actually doing it safely. If you're going to do a basket with the ladies' heels at eye height, then you need to be aware that there are stilettos at eye height. It's not a good experience.
No.
Whereas if it's at an event at a festival or a dance that's put on for dancers who are expecting to dance and with others who they expect to have a reasonable level of competence, it's about actually, you could rush through a star in 6 bars and then stand around waiting for the music to catch up. Or you could phrase it so that you fit it into the 8 bars and you move nicely into the next move. And it's more satisfying to dance, it's more satisfying for everybody else, and indeed it's more satisfying for those on the stage to watch it.
And so you're saying that you're going to be on the stage. So are you going to do all your teaching as a caller from the stage?
Can I jump here first?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm 5'3" and I rarely can see over anyone's head, so I need a stage.
Right.
I've had kind of like wooden pallets at some barn dances, but I need a little bit of height, otherwise I can only see the 2 people in front of me and that's it. Like, yes. God knows what's happening at the back of the room.
So you're going to stick to the stage for practical.
Yeah. But if I break out and say do an international dance where it's a bit more footwork, then yes, I will get down and kind of onto the floor and make sure that people are quiet and I can see everyone in a big circle where I'm in the middle of it. So yeah, in most cases, stages are really good.
Okay, Victoria, what about for you?
Really depends. So if I'm doing a Saturday night dance, most of the time I'll be on the stage. If I'm doing a workshop, then I'll do the majority from the stage, but go down and demonstrate things or get a group to work within a group to show something that I'm wanting to bring out. If I'm doing a barn dance or a Ceilidh, I'll be down on the floor the whole time, despite
Why is that?
also being 5'3".
Yeah, so why is that?
So that's really about, I find if I'm on the stage, I'm very ignorable, and the conversations can carry on in around the tables, and they don't need to worry about this entertainment that's going on over there. That's fine. You come down on the floor, it helps to be able to say, okay, you need to be working with you, and when I say a square set, that means you're facing in, and all that sort of stuff. But also I'm kind of here and I'm part of the gathering, and you need to engage with this a bit. So, building that atmosphere.
So what I'm getting from this is that the entertainer and teacher, when you're on stage, that entertainer role maybe is quite important, but that you might come down from the stage if you want to do more of a kind of Hemingway approach to teaching, showing people things rather than telling them things. Okay, so I mean, it sounds to me so far in your role as caller, you're saying maybe there isn't such a chasm. So let's stir things up a bit. Is it your job as a caller at a Ceilidh, a contra, or an English country dance to do new things or to do old things? Rhianwen, do you want to go first with that?
Do you mean new or old dances, as in kind of bringing some Playford out, or do you mean new to me? Should I kind of introduce?
Well, either of those, go for it. But
I've not done.
Yeah.
I tend to try and throw some old dances in there. I don't specify the music with that though. So if I bring out a Playford dance and they want to throw a big bassy drum kit in there, great, let's go for it. I tend to throw a Playford into every Ceilidh I do. Don't necessarily tell everyone it's Playford, but there is usually an old dance there. I try to mix up my repertoire quite well. I try to introduce new things all of the time, and I will shamelessly steal dances with the caller's permission if I find something that I really enjoy dancing. But that's kind of whether I enjoy dancing it is whether it gets put in my call box. I don't want anything in my call box that I don't like dancing. So Goddesses is not in my call box.
Yeah, that's one of the first dances I did inexpertly, age 7. I remember doing this to the National Military Band. And I loved it. But it's interesting what you're saying there. So you're saying that you're explicitly trying to bring in some old things, but you also think it's a key part of your role to bring in new things. Is that, is there a chasm there? So Victoria, is that the same for you?
So no, I mean, a lot of my repertoire for English country dance, and I should probably specify, when I do an English dance, it's a mixed dance. So I've got Old English, there'll be Playford, there'll be Kynaston, there'll be Walsh, all that sort of generation from the 16 and 1700s. There'll be Modern English, written by contemporary or recent composers. There'll be American squares, there'll be contras, there'll probably be something with some stepping, a rant or a polka maybe, or a hornpipe, which can be controversial, but enjoyable. So I do sometimes do just a Playford evening. I'd expect that to be just the period, but at a mixed evening, I'd expect that full range of old and new, both if I'm leading it and indeed if I go to one, I prefer that. Would I introduce new stuff? Yes. At some point, the new stuff to you have to try out on an audience, otherwise it never becomes part of your repertoire. You have to be a bit cautious about who you try it out on and how much preparation you've done before you try it out on people. In contrast, when I'm calling at a Ceilidh or a barn dance, I don't do that many of them. I have a fairly limited repertoire. They don't mind if they have the same as the last week's Ceilidh, or indeed as the last time you had them, because they won't remember what they've danced. Hopefully just that it was fun. That's why they've booked me again.
And that question of repertoire, you know, because when we had our kind of rehearsal conversation, we had quite an interesting discussion about repertoire and what difference it can make if within a community of dances you've got a repertoire. So if you're calling a dance and you know the dancers have a repertoire, do you want to build on that, or do you want to continue to bring in these things that are either new or new to you? Rhianwen, what would you do?
It depends on. This is a part of the organisation with the organiser that I was talking about before, and it really depends on what the dancers and the organiser want. If they just want the same dancers because they really like those dancers and they're going to get those dancers, then give it to them. But if they are up for trying something new, and whether that's a brand new dance I've written last week, then great, I can do that. But yeah, it is really what the dancers want and whether they're up for trying new things. Contra dancers I found are really up for trying new things, and Ceilidh dancers, this is a massive generalization, but they like certain dancers being in there in a night, so I try and make sure I throw those in, whether it's kind of Clopton Bridge or Nottingham Swing or Boston Tea Party, that kind of thing.
Because one of the things that was emerging on the chat as we're waiting to start the event, though, is that there seem to be people who might now be, for example, going to dances that in the States you might call ECD, or over here we might call Playford dances, but they were going to Ceilidh's and they were doing step dancing and they were doing display dancing when they were younger. So, I mean, I just wonder, Victoria, do you think there's a kind of generational repertoire thing? Is that something that's in your mind when you're calling a dance?
I think there's an energy level. So some clubs, and it's not always based on age, but that may be a determinant of it. Some clubs will be lively and enthusiastic and actually will want something that is bouncy most of the evening. And I would throw in something slow and stately for contrast, and sort of challenge them to try that. And there are other clubs that actually want slow and stately, whether that's because of their physical capabilities or their perception of their physical capabilities or their habits maybe, or could be all of those. But in those situations, I'd probably throw in something that's a bit livelier and again, challenge them to stretch the boundaries a bit. What Rhianwen says is absolutely right, though. If the club is saying, this is our repertoire, we don't like going out of our comfort zone, there's no point trying to drag them out of their comfort zone. They won't enjoy it, you won't enjoy it, you won't get a repeat booking. You know, what's the point of doing that? And if you're not prepared to do that, then the better thing to do is to say, actually, I'm not the person for you. You know, get somebody.
So is it almost like you feel that a little bit of a hired hand when you are asked to call a dance? I just wonder if you both feel the same way about that. So Victoria first and then Rhianwen.
Yes and no. So yes, definitely. They've asked for me, and they're paying at least expenses for that. So they want something particular from you. On the other hand, there's a reason they've asked me, not somebody else. And so that should be because they're aware of what I'm offering, which may be different from what somebody else is offering. And if they want more of a Ceilidh evening, they'd be much better off asking Rhianwen to do it.
Are they right, Rhianwen?
Are they right in booking me? Yeah, sure, go for it. But yeah, I completely agree. Like I am there to help facilitate the dancing and making sure people are enjoying themselves. I don't want to push people's boundaries and make people feel uncomfortable. That is not why I'm there. I'm there to make sure people are enjoying themselves. And I need to make sure I kind of fit to that certain dance's parameters while doing that. And so that's kind of discussing with the band and the organizer before, maybe kind of checking up a little bit about the dance series or the festival or something beforehand, so you go in roughly knowing what should happen, and that'll all change on the night anyway. But yeah, you you don't want to make people feel uncomfortable.
So this is really interesting, but so far I can't see a chasm. I can see a bit of a continuum, but not a chasm. So let's try exploring another aspect of this. So what is it that we're doing? Are we doing something that's part of a tradition? Is it heritage? Is it history? Are we creating something new for our own times? And if you have a particular position on those things, then actually maybe you might want to push some boundaries. And I certainly know as a musician that I could just do what you say, Victoria, and say to somebody, no, I'm not, I don't think I'm the right person to play for that. But I'm not sure. I think that it's useful to think about these things. So I'm going to come to Rhianwen first in a minute. So what are we doing? Is it tradition? You know, it's something that you've got maybe partly from your family. Is it heritage? What on earth does that mean? You know, there is a history to this. Does that history matter to you, or are we creating something new? How do you see it? Rhianwen, do you want to go first?
Oh, yeah, that's a really tricky question. So good question. I think that different areas of social dance treat this very differently or evolve, but I think all social dance does evolve eventually, and that's a personal solution of like start dancing and you get better and stuff like that happens. But that's really tricky, because I know that I get certain aspects of my dancing. I get my love of contra from my parents, and I wouldn't have been introduced to it at all if my parents do. And my dad called it. I just wouldn't have gone when I was little, and so that's very been passed down to me, and I enjoy it, like genuinely enjoy it, and that's why I keep going. Not because my dad still does it. So yeah, I think there is that kind of element of tradition. Heritage, you could argue that kind of the historic dances are very heritage, but on the flip side of that, there's new interpretations of Playford dances like still happening, really, and so those are those tradition, are those kind of heritage, because they're new interpretations, and we don't really have Playford's originals, especially of some of the dances. I think I brought this up when we had this conversation before, that some of the notation for Playford is so obscure. Do we really know what the original dance looked like? So again, this is an evolution. What we're dancing today, and we're calling Playford, is some kind of evolution of the original. So not heritage in that kind of way. But I think especially in the universities and then some areas of folk social dance right now, they're evolving at a very, very rapid pace. And so there's a lot of mix where you go nationally and where you end up dancing. But I would say that kind of folk societies and kind of IVDIV, for example, are really pushing kind of evolution boundaries and how quickly things are evolving there, from a social perspective. Do you agree?
I think that's really interesting. Can I come back to that in a minute? So just hang on to what's going on in the uni sector, because I think you've got an important perspective there. So Victoria, when it comes to what we're doing, you've also got a kind of family who brought you into this. So is it tradition? Is it heritage? Is it history? Is it creating something new?
I think it's a mixture. The fact that we're doing dances that were done in 1651, presumably before that, to be collected and published then, really matters to me. I think that heritage and that continuous line is so amazing, actually, that is really important. But the way that we're doing them now, I suspect would not be recognisable to the folk who were dancing them in the 1600s, because the notation that we've got passed down is sketchy. So it really doesn't tell us what they were doing. It really doesn't give us a clue what they were doing with the feet, what they were doing with the hands. They were wearing different clothing, and that affects how you dance. So all of those things mean that what we're doing is not the same as what they were doing. And so what we do most of the time is not historical reenactment. We're not trying to be faithful to a perception of what was done then. And many of the more recent interpretations of those older dances are explicitly said to be to make a good dance to be danced by a modern audience. So
what on earth does that mean? A dance by a modern audience. And then I'll come back to Rhianwen, you see, because I think there's a connection between these two things, but there might be a chasm. Go for it.
So the fact that some of the dances we know would be a minuet, and we still use a minuet tune for them, but we don't dance minuet stepping, and nor do most of us want to. My knees don't cope with minuet stepping, and you know, we're not in the habit of stepping anymore, by and large. So actually, we tend to look at dances as patterns and interactions with other people, not as stepping. And so when asked to do what we feel is complex stepping, we get distracted and we have to think about that and lose the sense of that dance. So I think for a modern audience, the interactions, the shapes, the way it engages with the music, that's more important to us than the stepping. In Elizabethan times, it was all about showing off how good you were at leaping, for example, in a galliard. That was really critical, and that's how you got your spouse, or impressed your monarch. Or, you know, there were really good reasons for that. Those aren't drivers for why we dance nowadays. Some of us find our spouses through dance, but for most of us, that's not why we go dancing. It's not to find a life partner.
I should have had flirtation on the list. Let's come back to that in a bit. That's okay. So what's going on in the uni sector from your point of view, Rhianwen? And is it different? You see, because I wonder if Victoria, when you use the word modern, and Rhianwen, you might use the word now or recent, actually there's a chasm. So what's going on?
So from a university perspective, if you think about kind of who's constantly going through university, people are only really there for 3 years, and then there's a constant cycle of people, and because they have their own committee within the university, they can really impose what they want out of dancing or what they want out of folk on the society, and kind of it really depends on who is in that society of like what it really evolves into. And so kind of while I was at Exeter University and I was in the folk society there, it moved away from the dancing quite well, at least the social dancing quite a lot, and moved more towards rapper dancing. They weren't as interested in the social dancing, but rapper they could really get behind. It's got swords, and so there's this constant fluctuation.
I see that argument,
of like of kind of what people want, and that the society has got to follow that so they get the members and so they can continue. And there's a lot more kind of close-knit friendships and discussions going on, and kind of do we want to go to this festival together? Do we want to do gender-free calling? Do we want to get this caller in? Kind of what does folk dancing mean to us? And so because it's such a close-knit group, I think they evolve at a quicker rate, and different societies like nationally are quite different because of that reason. So Exeter is almost exclusively right now just music. They don't really have much dancing because the people that are part of the society, they just want a good session, and great, give it to them. They will still come along to IFDIV and really enjoy that, but they just want to do the music. Whereas Sheffield, they don't really have a Ceilidh society anymore. They're just doing Morris and rapper. Whereas kind of if you think of Sheffield University from even 5-10 years ago, it was mainly Ceilidh based, and they were doing it a certain way. So I think there's a constant kind of fluctuation within society, so they can get members and they can follow what people are wanting, which means that if you compare it to festivals, it's really different.
And we'll come back to festivals, but Louise has joined us. So what's the question?
Well, it's a question about festivals, so I hope this isn't jumping the gun.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. And I need to do a confession. I'm wearing my Sidmouth Champion t-shirt for a reason, and I'm going to come back to this a bit later. So Louise, go for it.
Fantastic. So Denise and Norman Barron ask, are we at risk of splitting into contra, ECD, Ceilidh for dances as it's tending to at festivals? So what's the relationship between festivals and local dances, things like that?
So I'd love to know what you two think. So Victoria, do you want to go first with that? Thanks, Louise.
Yeah, so I think at festivals things are often billed as contra or American, or as English. Now, how far do you stretch that? Some places call it Playford and American, or Playford and contra. To me, that's even narrower. Playford, if you're being strictly accurate, is the first few editions of the Dancing Master only. It's not even the rest of the Dancing Master or the other contributors around that time. I think they do that partly so people can see what they're going to get, in the hope and expectation that at a festival you have the opportunity to go to different events to experience those different things. It also means that where there are specialist callers who specialise in one particular part of one particular genre within the tradition, you can use them and get the best out of them, and not say, I know you're brilliant at contras, but could you just call some Playford, because we want everything to be a mixed event. There needs to be space for both of those. Now, at the events that I'm calling at outside of festivals, and at evening dances at festivals, those are usually mixed events. They're not solely Playford, they're not solely contra, they're not solely one genre. I think that's different in the States. I think that's very much ECD or contra, and probably squares come in a whole different place. And do the people mix from one event to another? I'm not sure, but certainly during an event, you'll only get exposed to that one bit of the tradition.
So, Rhianwen, when you go to a festival, do you just go to one kind of thing?
Usually, yeah.
I didn't
there's usually a
expect
tea
that.
dance.
So that is really interesting answer. Okay, so what kind of thing do you go to?
So I'd take Sidmouth, for example. You are in the t-shirt. I will go to the morning contra workshop because they usually get a really good call, a really good band, and I'm learning something. I've hit that stage where learning something in contra doesn't happen very often to great quality. I blame my dad for that. And so I definitely go to those workshops, and I will go to the LNE in the evening, because those are kind of two separate things that I want, and the people that are there are two very different groups. You've got a really high energy Ceilidh, and then you've got high energy contra, but there's kind of who's there and how you're dancing. There's rarely much crossover. So I'll deliberately go to those two dances. But usually at a festival, there is a tea dance or a mixed dance or a mixed program dance. But I agree with Victoria again. I'm sorry, we're agreeing too much, Ali. But I agree with Victoria that kind of at festivals especially, you usually have specialist callers, people that are kind of picked to call for that festival for a reason, because they kind of have done so much research into Playford, or they're really good at contra calling, or they're great at kind of doing high energy Ceilidhs. And they're different skill sets. And so you're very lucky if you can cross over into all three.
So I find this absolutely fascinating because when I was your age, obviously that was a couple of months ago, and I went to my first Sidmouth festival in 1974. One of the things that I explicitly wanted to do is go to many different things. So I would go to some of the things, because I originally went with my grandparents. So I go to some of the things that they'd be interested in going to. And then it was a thing of honor, when you used to have those little paper tickets, and you got a little click, a hole in it if you went to late night extra, that I would go to all the late night extras as well. And it's true that the kinds of people who would be going to late night extras wouldn't be exactly the same as some of the people who were going to some of the events during the day, but there was something of an overlap. And I've always loved the idea that at a festival, as a musician, I can go past a marquee or a hall and I think, what's that? Who is that? I've got to find out. who is playing that? And so I think I suppose I hope that festivals wouldn't create chasms, but I think the whole point of the question, and I don't know, Louise, if we're able to do this, can we come back to the questioner and come back to you, because obviously you've got your experience of what happens not only in the UK but the States. So do you think festivals are building a chasm?
I think that UK festivals are quite different from American festivals for the most part. I'm trying to think. NEFA, the New England Folk Festival Association's festival, they have a mixture of genres. And in my experience, which is limited because New England's quite far away, so I haven't been very often, the people who attend do tend to self-segregate to based on genre to a certain extent. They'll maybe try a new thing for a workshop, but usually only if the workshop builds an introductory one. And yeah. Go ahead, Alice.
No, I just think that's fascinating, and maybe we should be. I'm absolutely certain there are things to celebrate it, and some of the things that Victoria and Rhianwen have said fit in with that. But I do worry about it, and this is why I think it's really interesting that Judith asked us to have this discussion, and without saying who it was, because I think this is such an important question. So who's missing? So when you're calling a dance, who's missing that, in fact, you would really like to be there? So Victoria, again, do you want to go first, and then I'll come back to Rhianwen?
So the majority of the crowds that I see are in their 50s and up, so 50s and up, maybe 60s and 70s and up at quite a lot of events. So my perception is that the 20s and maybe into the early 30s are dancing at the high energy stuff. So they're at the Ceilidhs and the contras. And my perception is that we're losing the 30s and 40s because, for lots of reasons, they're focusing on family and career and all those sort of things. They're not coming to the clubs because perhaps there's a feeling that a club is a required commitment to turn up every week or every time. And if you're not there the next time you turn up, it's, oh, you weren't here last week. It might be not meant in that way, but it might come across as, and we're keeping track on that, and why weren't you here? So I think we are losing those people. Now, some of them will have danced when they've been younger, as children or as young adults, and I think there's more chance that they come back when life calms down a bit, and they think, okay, now we've got some time. We loved dancing when we were younger. Why don't we do that again? Some of them we don't get, and some come to dancing for the first time when they're that bit older. But I think the ones we're really missing out on are the 30s and 40s.
Okay, Rhianwen, is that who you're missing? Or are there other people that we might be missing?
If we're just talking about dances that I call,
yes.
Ooh, that's tricky, because the ones that I've called most recently have been really high energy, so I'm actually missing the top end of the spectrum with the dances that I've called within, well, I want to say the last year, but nothing's happened within the last year. So yeah, I would actually say the top end of the spectrum for me. But then I do get invited to do the odd club dance as well. So yeah, it does depend on where you're invited and kind of which dance series you're invited to within that, or festival, for example. I think the last gig I did was Ivdiv just before lockdown, and so yes, that was mostly kind of university students and up till maybe just a bit older than my parents' age, but not much beyond that. I'm not going to say how old my parents are because they'd shoot me.
Can I loop back on what you were saying about the university clubs, actually, Rhianwen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Are they mostly people who are new to dancing and starting something new at university, or are they mostly folk like you who've had some some or lots of acquaintance with folk and have looked for it in their university?
I think it's a bit of a mixture, and kind of I wasn't planning on actually involving myself with a folk society when I joined uni, because I wanted to try something new, and it was very much a really, I've been there and done that, and kind of, yes, it'll be nice to meet people and go to IVDIV with people that I know, but otherwise I'm just going to be stuck teaching. And I ended up joining anyway because I found something that I could be taught doing. There was a lovely Welsh clogger in the society who ended up being president, and I was like, that is what I will learn. So I got something out of it that way. And I know that some people that have grown up with folk actively steer away from the folk societies when they join a university, because university, let's try something new. I know that different societies around the country have different kind of societies that they're linked with, almost in a way. So the I'm trying to think, Sheffield, my sister's currently president of one of the Sheffield folk societies. They have quite strong links with the LGBTQ society, and I think off the top of my head, maybe the Dungeons and Dragons Society.
Okay.
And they have a lot of crossover of members, and that's how people are being introduced to try something new. And that is one of the ways that kind of there is that evolution. So if they're Dungeons and Dragons, there might be more costume balls, for example. That kind of thing. In
I could see that working. I like
we had a link with Jane Austen Society. We had a link with the Jane Austen Society in Exeter, and so we did a Playford ball for them once a year, and we mashed together the societies for one evening. So yeah.
So I'm just wondering if anyone else is missing there. I'm just thinking the university that I work in, it's, you know, it represents the London community that I'm a part of, you know, and there's a lot of diversity there. But when I play for London Barn Dance, I'm not so sure it's as diverse as it is when I'm at work. Should we be worried about this? Are we actually creating a chasm between us, whoever we might be, and some of our neighbours? Rhianwen, do you want to go first on that, and then I'll come back to Victoria?
I don't know this, but I'm not sure if there is a general cycle of like how things happen, as Victoria was talking about before, as people start having families in your kind of 20s, 30s, whether you naturally drop out of folk while you're in that very busy period time of your life, and then come back into it when introducing kids to folk is a little bit more manageable and less scary. Hats off to my parents for doing it, because introducing small kids to a massive room full of people and stuff like that can be really intimidating. So
I was really impressed with the way they did it, and I couldn't do it with my kids, who are almost the same age as yours. But what I meant was, what about I'm just thinking that if I go out into the street in London, I hear many languages, and I'm seeing people who generally have been born in London, but they've got connections all over the world. And one of the things that's fascinated me about musicians in the US, like Rhiannon Giddens and so on, is that they're kind of tapping into a kind of musical set of traditions that I find really fascinating. But I don't see that happening here.
Oh, you mean kind of a cultural as opposed to okay.
Yeah, but also,
there is that gap missing, and I completely agree. When you go to a dance, it's usually relatively middle class and very white. And can we introduce people into it? Can we do some kind of fusion? I know some people, Lisa Hayward, for example, has done fusion stuff in the past, but that's been very very specialized, and I think very one-off. I have no idea how you can kind of have how to introduce crossover. I think it would be really interesting. Kind of, could you mix kind of Bollywood dancing with Ceilidh? Let's give it a go. Like I'd be really up for trying it. how you go about it and how, if people would go back and try it again. I have no idea.
A lot of high energy in Bangor, isn't there? But
There is.
I'm not sure that. So I don't know whether mixing is the answer, because one of the things as a musician is that I find it quite frustrating if I'm asked to play one particular tradition of music for another dance, and I'm thinking, well, how can I make that work? I can't make the music and the moves, whether it's the figures or the steps, work. But I do want the people. So anyway, Victoria, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the dance population is unbelievably white and middle class. Certainly in England, I think it's a little bit more mixed in the States, but not very. And I think that's a real shame. I would say that it's not because we don't want the people, but we're not good at selling what we do as a good thing. Your average man on the street, if you say you do folk dancing, they probably think of Morris. And alas, over the last 20 years, Morris in this country has predominantly meant half a dozen fat men drinking beer and barely leaving the floor. And it's not a good advert for what we do. Now, there are some people who are doing it differently. Nifty's one of the teams who do everything really well, actually. And they are doing across the spectrum of display, which is really introducing people. But we're predominantly not going out there evangelizing about what we love about this thing that takes up a lot of most of our time. And so it doesn't get the interest from other people to come along and try it. Now, various other traditions, as a country, we're really good at trying it out and having a go. Zumba swept the world, well, at least swept the country a few years ago. That's not a British tradition, but it was embraced. We somehow need to find a way to do that, to introduce people to what it is we do, and we'd love you to come along and try it, because it will fit in. And actually, it has echoes with a lot of other traditions, because every tradition dances, and every tradition has music in it. So it is an inherently person thing to dance and to dance to music. But somehow there's a perception that it's not for you if you're not matching everybody else. And I don't think that's necessarily a conscious, I wouldn't go to that because they're all white. I think it's almost not even aware that it's there. It's not even something that crosses the mind.
So, I mean, I think, Louise, it looks as if someone else had a question that they were asking to be put, and I have a big thing that I want to come back to that I've been saving right to the end because it's about the music and the callers. So, so Louise, what was the question? Was it one from Ian?
There was a question from Ian. I'm wondering if you feel like you're on a thread, then we can save the questions to the end because Ian's had to go anyway, so he'll have to catch it on the video.
Okay, so if I ask my last question and then we come back to all the other questions at the end. Okay, so apologies because one or two people might have heard me talking about this before, but I really, in the same way as Victoria, you really care about this and you want to do this all the time. I'm very interested in the role of the music in dancing and the relationship between the musicians who are mostly going to be on the stage with you, and that's kind of where we started with this conversation, and so the relationship between the musicians and the caller and the dancers and the caller, and I wondered what you thought the music was for. Are the musicians the one who are bringing in the tradition? Is it their job to make it lyrical? Is it the job of the musicians to make people, to help people do the steps or the moves? Is it supposed to encourage them to improvise? Does the music have a role in terms of it being a social event? Can it scaffold their learning? So what does the music bring for you to the party, if it is going to be a party? Who wants to go first with this one?
Go on, I will. I think the music is vital. music is really important, because if you don't have the music, what you're doing is walking around in shapes. You're not dancing. Now, I forget who it was who said dancing is music made visible, but that really,
yeah,
thank you, yes, that really resonates with me, that is what we're doing, and that's why I feel that at least part of my job is to enable the dancers to be able to dance with and to that music. If the band are playing something that is totally inappropriate for that set of steps and figures, that's much harder to be able to make it visible. It's not impossible, but it's much harder. And depending on the skills of your crowd, that may be possible or it may be impossible for them. But a band can also sort of bring out something that's really unexpected in a tune, something that the caller hasn't thought of or hasn't come across before, which can put a different light on that dance and lift it or change it or give it a different expression. And that's why we have bands. We don't just use CDs where you know what you're getting every time. CDs, recorded music, is fabulous for when you can't afford or can't get hold of a band. But you know, having it as live music who can interact with what they're seeing on the floor and sort of feed off that, and if it's a room full of people who want to leap about, responding to that and giving them something that makes them more able to leap around. If it's a room who are more static, being able to bring in that lyricism so that they can glide across the room, they can make beautiful shapes. A band who are really paying attention to what's going on the dance floor can enhance that experience, and the dancers will react to that and dance better to that music, which will give the band a lift. So it all kind of spirals up, and the caller just sits back going, "This is wonderful. I like this."
Interesting. Okay, Rhianwen, is there a chasm there? Yeah, because I think that you were saying some different things right at the start. Thank you.
I think the band does have to kind of drive the dancing. They've definitely got to give people lift, and kind of I find that, at least personally, different music enhances or changes my emotions, and so the band has got to realize that and then channel that in to go, actually, we want to inspire this emotion or this kind of movement with our music, and that is what has got to, so if we're talking like different genres, kind of contra sounds very different to Ceilidh because you want to inspire different movement.
There's a brilliant cartoon that Molly Koenigsberger, who might be on the call and I love, where the cartoonists, they're sitting in a saloon and bad guy coming in, minor key, so we've got something to bring to the event. I have to say though that I'm being an accordionist, I'm not normally allowed to play for Ceilidh. That's a whole other chasm we could discuss another time. When I'm playing for contra though, I have some choice. And, once I've agreed with the caller what the set is going to be, we've got quite a lot of choice about whether we stick with one tune, how much improv we do. Whereas for ECD, as a musician, I am told what the tunes are going to be. I'm usually told how fast I'm allowed to play it, which makes me, Victoria, feel a little bit as if I'm a CD player. I've also been told to completely change the accompaniment, because the caller's interpretation of the dance, and they've chosen the program. So we've got a bit of a chasm here, and I just wonder if it's bridgeable. And I know that Diane had her hand up, and there are a number of people from the US on the call. I'd be really intrigued to know what the people who are here at the event think about the balance between the people who've booked the caller, the people who book the band, usually the same people. Can be very difficult if it's not the same people, and the dancers, and who's having an interaction with who. So we've got to 8 o'clock. And I'd just like to say, before we kind of open it up, I love watching both of you dance. And I can completely understand that you could be a wonderful caller if you weren't also a lovely dancer, but you both dance beautifully. And because I think modeling is such a powerful teaching strategy, I just wanted you to salute you for that. And the fact that, you know, you may think, oh, I got to be the entertainer on the stage, but I'm prepared to, I may only be 5'3". I think you both said that. I'm jealous. I'm only 5 foot, right? But that you're willing to get down on the floor. And I would just say to both of you, I think that's a way to connect, you know, and to bridge any chasms that might be at the event. And I think, you know, I think both of you can do that absolutely beautifully. So Louise, I wonder, is this a good moment to come to the Q&A?
I think this is an excellent moment to come to the Q&A. Thank you all. You've provoked some really wonderful questions. So I am just going to go through them as they were submitted. And we'll start with Ian's. Ian Porter asks, I feel that we ought to be dancing everything, but my problem is that increasing age and infirmity prevents me from getting the full enjoyment from contra. So if I go to a mixed dance, I'm only physically capable of enjoying half the dance. I would love to join in the more energetic bits, but I'd fall over. I don't think that I'm alone in this problem. So I think the implicit question there is, how do we cope with the different levels of ability that want to participate in dances?
Yeah, this is such a brilliant question. Ian, thank you for this. So both nodding. So Rhianwen, do you want to go first and then Victoria?
I completely understand that different levels of you can only physically do what you're capable of, and sometimes that's not quite what you want to be capable of. And it's how we can kind of come up with a solution for it, because I know that if you take down the tempo of the music, people can get round dances easier. And so if I'm at a dance where people are less mobile, you can take down the tempo of the music a little bit to make it slower, and people are kind of, they find they have more time to physically move around. But that also, if you change that aspect of a dance, you're probably going to lose the more energetic dancers because they want to dance energetically. Like sometimes I just really want to go full throttle at a dance, and who I'm dancing with, and I know with some people I really shouldn't do that, and that is okay too, because I do want to dance with them too. So it's how you find that balance of keeping everyone happy. I think that certain dance clubs are better suited for certain type of dancing, and certain festivals and certain dances that you go to at festivals are suited for different levels of physical and energy levels. They're suited for that. Alani's being one end of the spectrum, tea dances probably at the other.
And so at a festival, if we all go to the same festival, then we can maybe exercise some choice. So if Sidmouth runs next year, do go to Sidmouth. Other festivals are available. I have just very, you know, strong feelings about having gone there when I was a teenager and continued to go. So Victoria, what did you want to say in response to Ian's question?
I think it's a really interesting question, actually. I think the desire to do all the different styles, and actually the implicit acknowledgement that those styles are different, is important, because we can be in danger of doing everything at a walk and it all looks the same. And actually our traditions are different. There is some stuff that is ranting and it's jumping, and there's some stuff that is gliding, and there's some stuff that is staccato and stepped, and all sorts of other things in between. So recognizing those differences in styles is important. I think each of us being aware of what our own physical limitations are. There are ways that you can continue to dance and take account of those. You can be bouncing in your head and your knees don't have to do it, but you come across looking different, and you get that liveliness in the way you walk around gracefully, as opposed to, you know, in your head there's the 20-year-old bouncing, and you know, we've all got one of those. One of the best dancers I've ever come across was a lady called Elsie, who danced at our club for years. She continued dancing into her 90s, and when I first met her, she was somewhat younger than that, she was able to do double steps and cover lots of ground. As her physical capabilities reduced, she simply took smaller loops and went into a graceful walk as opposed to a double step. But one thing that always happened when you met Elsie in a dance was that she was just on time with the music, and she was always helping other people without going,
Yes.
you go that way, push that.
Yes.
And offering
Yes.
a hand. So a pleasure to dance with. You knew you wouldn't be getting a wild swing with her, but you also knew it would be a pleasure to dance with her. And
Yeah.
if we could all aspire to doing that, that's the way I want to go.
Yeah, Victoria, I think that's just amazing. Well, one of the things that's interesting about this, though, is that when I was your age, Rhianwen, and maybe 7 or 8 years younger than that, my asthma wasn't very well controlled. And so I couldn't do the energetic stuff for long. I could probably do it more now than I could then. But one of the people who's posted in the chat, who I know on the call, was here for the event I want to describe. As you remember, I said other festivals also exist. So one of the things that I love about some of the events that you get in Whitby at the Pavilion is you get that mixture of generations, and you often have events where you might have several bands playing, and trying to make a really good segue from one band to another has become a bit of a thing to aim for. But in the 1980s, I was playing in a band called Blue Mountain Band, and the Three Shepherds were the act during this event. And we said, well, and Madeline Smith, who I think may be on the call, so it was the caller, and she decided to do Morpeth Rant. This is in Yorkshire. And I'm going to have trouble not welling up telling you about this, because there were the most ancient people on the floor who had had the advantage of dancing since they were small. And so their stepping was, I'm lost for words to describe it, but they were stepping, but with an appropriate amount of effort for them. Yes. And so in the band, I was in my 20s, the Shepherds were in their 70s and 80s. The other members of the band were included, certainly people in their 50s, maybe somebody in their 40s. So the music and those big kind of traditional dances, maybe they've got something that can bridge those chasms. And so I do think that giving a strong place for the music and for some traditional dances that are part of a key repertoire, that actually might bridge some chasms. But I don't know, and I've never been to the States. This is one of my lifetime ambitions, Louise. So I just wondered what your response would be, from somebody who's danced in the States more maybe than in the UK.
Yeah, I think that this is perhaps one of the ways that crossover is possible, because I think about the way that Money Musk or Chorus Jig are kept alive in contra dance communities that are otherwise utterly uninterested in the idea of a core repertoire. And yet that one dance comes around and suddenly the room is energized in a way that even the people who are new and unfamiliar with it, they understand that something different and special is happening in this moment. On the other hand, I would say in the US English community, there's a wide divergence of attitudes toward core repertoire. Some communities have one, and others think the whole idea is sort of outmoded. And I would turn the question around and say, how much of a core repertoire is evident in the UK? And maybe if I can, I'll tie this to a question that Celia and Nigel Close asked. Which is the concept of a regular club becoming obsolete in our pop-up / flash mob / commitment averse society? And I wonder if there's a link between the aversion to attending regular events, like Victoria was talking about earlier, this kind of nervousness about commitment to something that you maybe don't have the space to commit to, and also the attitude towards a core repertoire.
Rhianwen?
Okay, core repertoire. I've got to say, if I go to a contra, I'd I usually see a wizard's walk there somewhere. I tend to go to quite high energy contras. That is usually in there somewhere, and I will absolutely be up for that dance every single time. For Ceilidh, I love Nottingham Swing and some of those other dances, especially for certain bands. Love it. So I will definitely be up for that dance. Playford, if it's goddesses, I'm back of the room. But there's kind of Mount Hills I absolutely love, and so and Childgrove, that's usually in every single, well, at least what the ones that I've been to, every single Playford repertoire, because it's just a great dance, and we should keep great dances. If they're great to dance, let's keep them. Why not? But from a club perspective, I personally don't go to dance clubs. If I'm calling, then great, yeah, I'll come along for that one gig, but I don't have the space in my schedule to commit to something every week, and that's usually because I'm calling somewhere in the country at the weekend that I'm having a kind of weeknight at home kind of situation. So I'm not sure if it's how different people are kind of living their lives right now. I don't think that's going to change for me anytime soon, where I can commit to a weekly dance every single week and knock out 2 hours of my evening.
Victoria, this is fascinating.
Yeah. So there's a lot in the question, really.
Yes.
Core repertoire, there kind of is a core repertoire across the country, but there kind of isn't. So there are dances that people who've been dancing a while, a long time, are familiar with. And if you announce them, as Louis said, there's that rise in energy. You go, ooh! And actually, even when it's a dance you hate, so when Goddesses comes up, there'll still be a kind of reaction, even if oh, and that reaction actually around the room is still energizing, which is quite bizarre. But it's a, oh, I recognise that one, which leads you to think, oh, well, people would like things they recognise. But we seem to have changed as a dance community. Certainly the bit of it that I see, into not actually remembering dances as a whole dance. So they might recognise a title, might not, because they probably were talking when it was announced and misheard it or didn't listen. Or they might well recognise the tune, and a lot of what I do has its own tune. So that link is stronger than if you're using any tune for a dance. So that sort of familiarity, see, it relaxes people. Like, oh yeah, I know this. They might not remember the moves, but they feel like they know it, so they relax. Now, our local club, Nottingham, have had a core repertoire for years. We introduced it 10 years or more ago, with a few purposes, one of which was to allow those people who were quite new to going to anything but the club, so new to going out to Saturday evening dances, to feel that sense of, oh, I recognise this, occasionally during the evening, because the feedback we'd got from them was, I didn't know any of the dances. Never mind the fact that the caller was explaining them and doing a great job. I didn't recognise any of it. It was stressful. So that was one of the reasons we introduced the core repertoire. We really never got to the stage where you could announce the dance and people would dance it. But those clubs that started in the 60s and 70s, the repertoire for ECD was much, much smaller, because there's been a huge amount written and a huge amount researched since then, since that folk revival. So the repertoire was much smaller. People did know the dances. They did do the same dances every week. That doesn't appeal to me, doing it every week. Even
it's not necessarily inclusive, is it? I mean, because if you have somebody who says that, yes, exactly, you've just used the phrase. So, it's not simple, is it? How do we bring people in and make them feel welcome, make them want to come back? And just
coming back on the point about all the clubs dying out and the regular commitment, that I think it requires a different sort of ethos in a club to say it is okay if people come and go and can only come once a month or once a fortnight, or when their shifts allow, or the kids played up and I couldn't make it, and that's fine. And I think there's probably that feeling is there, but the way that it comes across almost certainly isn't. And it's already, you walk into a room of dancers, they all appear to know what they're doing. It's completely foreign language. The caller says up, and you look at the ceiling, and everybody else faces the stage. And what was that about? It's already pretty alien. And then to have this expectation, and you will be back next week, won't you? I can see why that puts people off very rapidly before they've had a chance to discover it's not like that. I'm not sure I have an answer for how we make it obvious that that's not the case, apart from saying we'd love to see you back when it fits in with you.
I'm not sure this
Louise?
question is directly connected, but it seems to me to be sort of adjacent, if you will. Patricia asks, many people really enjoy a wedding ceilidh or a PTA barn dance, and then they don't do another one for years. So could our callers who call for committed dancers as well as the occasional dance be more of a bridge between those two groups, between the occasional and the regular?
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Rhianwen.
I was going to say, I'm not sure how much of it is a kind of gap of, I really enjoyed this dance and at this wedding. How do I then start going regularly? Because you don't tend to finish a wedding ceilidh by going, and here's all of the dancers in your local area. You shouldn't, well, I've never advertised stuff like that after a gig. It doesn't seem like an advertising opportunity, or should be. It should be about the people getting married. So I'm not sure if it's a lack of a bridge there between, I really enjoyed this, how do I then start doing it, or how can I go back again? So maybe that might need to be a bit more obvious. Maybe that's something that I could work on, maybe saying at the end, if you enjoyed this and you would like to do it again, like just come up and talk to me, like after the gig. If not, enjoy your night, kind of thing.
I think
that might be something I need to work on.
I think there's an opportunity to say, oh, and I do this regularly. Clubs, there are clubs that do this. I think my problem with that is when I go to a ceilidh, if somebody does express some interest in doing it regularly, I think about the type of dancing that goes on at the local clubs and the type of dancing they've just done, and think they won't see it as the same dance, and actually there isn't somewhere that I can point them to that will feel like what they've just experienced but allow them to do it regularly. And that's different in different areas. There are more ceilidh clubs around the place that you could direct them to, and in the region I'm in, there isn't that. So it feels a bit, there are places you can dance, it won't feel like what you've just done. So I'm a bit nervous about pointing you that direction.
Now, I just wonder if the festivals make the most of all the opportunities they have to reach out to the local area. And that's one of the things, to hark back to Sidmouth, that there used to be events at dances on the Ham rather than just big concerts on the Ham. And you would have local groups kind of coming along to that. But it is difficult. I think it is a difficult chasm, if it is one. And I think Rhianwen's point that, when you go to a wedding or you go to a birthday party, it's about the social event, isn't it? And the people that you're there with, and the music and the dancing is just enabling them to experience that rather than a centre of their attention.
I think it's a good point about the festivals being an opportunity for outreach, and something like Chippenham Festival, which has dancing in the in public spaces, out in the streets. There are display teams. There are ceilidhs going on in the street, and it was better when the arena wasn't enclosed, because you could sort of not commit to going inside, but just sort of walk past and look at it out the corner of your eye and see what's going on. But that is putting it out there, and they do have a schools day, which is introducing not only the kids but probably the parents as well to what's going on. But I think there's a lot more opportunity for that, because an awful lot of dance events that we go to, Lichfield used to have that sort of dancing in the streets, and it no longer does. And that's quite a trend with quite a lot of festivals, that they've become insular. They've become events that are wonderful if you're already in the community, and completely hidden if you're not in the community. And finding a way that we can change that round and introduce people to what's going on without drag them off the street and make them do it, that's a good thing we should try and do.
Can I jump here and just ask a question to the rest of you? Usually when you see these kind of outreach at festivals, they're Ceilidhs. They're not mixed program and they're not contra or American. Do you think that could be a thing? Do you think that festivals could start up people off on contra, or do you think that's just too alien?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And there's also a generational aspect to this, because I think the festivals are often really good at reaching out to children. And then just thinking of how do we get them through the teenage years and then to continue, unless they join a group that performs. So who are we contributing to? If you've enjoyed any of the conversation, I know we've got a couple more questions to go, Louise, but I just wondered if it might be worth putting in the chat the link to Nifty again. So Louise, what's the next question?
So we have a few more questions, and I'm trying to think about what order to do them in, but I'm going to start with the question that suggests that perhaps callers are responsible for creating chasms. Bert Hunter asked, and several people asked if we could follow up on it. The real chasm is surely the elephant in the room, which has been alluded to briefly, which is gender-free calling. How can we heal the rift in our inclusive pastime that this has caused?
Who's going first? Rhianwen?
Okay, so I vaguely brushed over this before, and I think that different areas of at least English social dance have very different opinions of this, and I think this is they're evolving at different rates. If I look at the university societies, they have exclusively decided, unanimously, we are going to move towards gender-free calling, and that is to do with who's currently in those societies and how they feel included, and they've got certain societies, especially because of who they're associated with and who kind of involve themselves with the society, have really personal feelings towards gender and pronouns and how they identify themselves. And so actually, whether you call them a man or a woman, they feel really strongly about that, and we shouldn't make them feel that actually, no, that's not important, we're going to still do things our way, because those are their feelings. But if you look at a different end of the spectrum, some people are very happy with how things are and they don't want things to change, and that's their prerogative too. And so it's trying to mesh these two very different groups of people who have very, very valid feelings about both. As a caller, I will do as I'm told by the organizer, because I don't want to make certain people feel uncomfortable. And if I'm going to a dance series, I want people to keep coming back to that dance series, no matter what I've done there in that one night. If it's a Ceilidh, I tend to do gender-free anyway, because you're doing this, usually it's symmetrical between what you're doing with your partner. Obviously, ladies' chains, sometimes called chains across, those are a little bit more complicated to explain, but especially wedding Ceilidhs, kind of if two blokes get up to dance together and then I say there's a men's line and a ladies' line, they will split up like that. And it's like, you've chosen that person to get up to dance with. I shouldn't impose my views on that to make you split up. So as a caller, I will do as I'm told, because I'm facilitating. But yeah, there is that massive chasm, and there's strong feelings involved on both sides, so you've got to be very aware of that.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's definitely a chasm, and it's a pretty challenging one to heal, because it's quite a rift. I think it touches on a lot of things we've talked about, actually. The history, the 400 and more years that we've been doing these dances, for the vast majority of that time, the purpose of the dance was to find a spouse, and the social requirement was that was an opposite sex spouse. So we've got all that history coming with the dances, I strongly believe that now that's not what we're doing it for, and that's not what should be perceived. And so man and lady have become labels for what they are. I think it's difficult if you replace those labels with different labels, the larks and ravens, for example. If you're working with a group of people who've been dancing and are used to the other labels, because actually you're then going, I know what I am, and I need to remember what that label is, and then I need to remember that I'm a first corner as well. That just takes processing time. I think if you're starting with a group who haven't been dancing before, you can do that much more easily. Definitely at a Ceilidh, I've done a few dances, as you say, at weddings, or indeed for youth groups, where they're at an age where the boys and the girls don't touch. So you have a set full of boys and a set full of girls. If you start saying the men's line, that just does not help anybody. So you find different labels for that. A's and B's, or the wall side and the door side, or there's lots of ways to do it. And I know that Louise is doing gender-free calling that you don't recognise as gender-free because it's not replacing the labels, it's about the positions. So it's with your partner or with your corner, or it's the door side or the wall side, and that I think is probably a way that we can start to bridge between that, because it has become very divisive about either I do gender free or I do not do gender free, and any divide like that, some people will change their minds and most people will just become more entrenched in that. And what we're doing is all the same. We're all dancing the same way. So being respectful of why the other side have that view is important, but finding a way that it stops being an issue, I think, is also important. Otherwise, those folk who are coming out of the universities will never dance with those who aren't dancing in the universities at the minute, because there won't be a common language, and it will feel a real, we don't do it like that.
So it does make your facilitating job more difficult, Rhianwen, doesn't it? When you've got a room of people who might come to dance, but they've come with those kind of different expectations. And I suppose that one of the reasons why I was intrigued by the title that Judith came up with for the talk is because that I do naturally want to be a bridge builder if I can, and I'm also interested in the other idea that other histories may also be available. So I got into this with my grandparents, who said, well, women don't do Morris dancing, and when I was trying to learn to play some of the Morris tunes, well, they were saying to me there's no point, and I listened to them, and that's something that I'll not do now. Okay, so I just would want Bert and Louise to both be able to come to a dance and be happy there. And I think that's a real challenge for callers, that you'd want that everybody to be happy because they could socialize. And it's a bit like the generational thing that you're going to call Morpeth Front, but you don't necessarily need to be given an oxygen tank to do it. So how can we make it inclusive? I think I don't know that I know how, but I know that's what I want. Rhianwen.
I think the common language between both are the positions. Like in gender-free calling, you can dance with your neighbour and you can dance with your partner, and those are the same in both languages, really. And so I'm actually, when I am calling gender-free, I'm consciously trying to use larks and ravens as little as I can get away with, and just calling by positions where you are in relation to your partner, because actually those are good teaching landmarks. You usually want to know within a dance, so you can recover it, is where is my partner, where should I be within the set, whether that's a group of four or kind of a group of four couples. Where do I need to be? Where is my partner? And you need to know those in both languages. So I try and get away with calling as little labels as I can. That also means I slip up a little less because I am doing a decent amount of gender-free calling and gender calling. So just I try and stick to positions, and it's good for kind of landmarks as well, for calling and recovering.
So, Louise, have we got time for the remaining questions?
Well, it's 1/2 past, and so technically we should be ending. And I was hoping that I could sneak in a question of my own, sort of as an ending theme question in continuation of what we've just been speaking about, which is, to what extent do you think that we as callers or musicians, people who are perceived of in some sense as leaders, even organizers, I would include in that category, how can we encourage dancers to help people bridge some of the chasms?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just going to go first briefly to give you to, because you've got the complicated answers. I think it's the job of the musician to speak to every heart in the room.
I like it.
Yeah, I want to make people enjoy it and enjoy it together as much as possible. And if they enjoy it, hopefully, fingers crossed, they'll come back. And so I need to, as a caller, gauge how people are feeling around the room, how comfortable they are dancing physically and emotionally, and whether that's at the end of the dance, find someone you've never danced with before to kind of meet someone new and kind of bring them to dance with, or I throw more mixers into the program so they have an opportunity of meeting more people around a room. I have to gauge that on the fly, but I just want people to enjoy it.
Yeah, I think getting people to enjoy it is a really critical part. I mean, we dance because we love it, and my primary ambition is to make everybody else be able to love it and enjoy it. I think as a caller, if you look like you're enjoying it, even on those occasional nights where it's not much fun, it's just a chore, if you look like you're enjoying it, that's infectious. And if you look like you're having a good time with the band, that's infectious, because people feel like it's a community, it's a group, it's together. Yeah. It's not one versus the other, and it starts to feel like they're part of that group, and so it's not about cracking jokes, thankfully, but it is about making it feel like you're enjoying it, so they enjoy it, and the band are enjoying it, and so everybody enjoys it. And being able to do that is when calling is at its best. And I think if the organisers are feeding off that and they're hopefully on the floor dancing and enjoying it and looking like they're enjoying it, they're not sat at the door counting the money, because most of the people have come in and agreeing who's doing the raffle and who's putting the urn on. If they're actually engaged in the dance, which is why we're there, that can really help.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to all three of you. This has been a really excellent conversation. For those of you who are still asking questions, I encourage you to, I don't know what I encourage you to do, reach out to people individually. I will share all the questions that we didn't get to with Ali and Rhianwen and Victoria. So if we get answers, we will add them to the video when we post it online. And I do want to remind people, Friends of Cecil Sharp House has a variety of events coming up, including on November 1st, Bernie Culkin calling a Playford Past and Present dance. And on the 14th of November, I'm running a positional calling workshop, so relevant to our recent discussion, for contra dancing specifically, but I think it's useful for any genre, really. And we will be posting, I did a Playford specific workshop on the same topic, positional calling, a couple of weeks ago, that we'll also be posting online. So check out fcsh.org.uk for those events and more. Judith, did you want to say something in farewell? Nope. Saw her pop up. Excellent. Bernie just put the link to the Friends of Cecil Sharp House website in the chat. Thank you all again. Thank you, Ali, Victoria, Rhianwen. It was lovely having this conversation, and I feel like we all learned a lot. So thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.